Welcome to the 26th episode of Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes. Hattie Brantley, the Angel of Bataan. Hattie Brantley never stopped tending to wounded GIs, whether in the jungles of the Bataan Peninsula, in the tunnels of Corregidor, or during her long imprisonment at the Santo Tomas internment camp. As a POW for nearly 3 years, she didn't let starvation, disease, lack of medical supplies, or the brutal treatment she received from Japanese guards stop her in caring for the young GI casualties under her care. Today's podcast tells the story of Hattie Brantley, better known as the Angel of Bataan. Special thanks to my wife, Christina Ulferts, who will give voice to Hattie's quotes in this episode. During the 1990s, while serving as a teacher in the Department of Defense dependent schools in Bad Kreuznach, Germany, my family and I visited many of the sites associated with World War II, from the beaches of Normandy, where the D-Day landings took place, to the Ardennes forest, where the Battle of the Bulge was fought, to the death camps of Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and Dachau. We saw what was at stake in World War II, when not only democracy in the U.S., but throughout the world, hung in the balance. I began to write to World War II veterans to thank them for their service. I sent them pictures of the sites we visited. I invited them to share their stories with me, and I promised to keep them alive in the classes I taught. What I never could have anticipated was that veterans shared their stories with their buddies and printed my letters in their reunion newsletters. I was soon corresponding with approximately 140 World War II veterans, 20 of whom received the nation's highest honor, the Medal of Honor. I had more material than I could ever use in the classes I taught, so to keep my promise, I will always remember World War II through veterans' eyes and launch this series of podcasts, which are based upon the book. Growing up in tiny Jefferson, Texas, attending a one-room school and hurrying home afterwards to milk the family cows, Hattie Brantley dreamed of becoming a nurse. Brantley attended Baylor School of Nursing in Dallas and graduated from the program in 1939. She quickly joined the Army Nurse Corps and spent 2 years at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, before she was given a transfer to Fort McKinley Station Hospital in the Philippines. Brantley accepted her station to the Philippines in the summer of 1941 with great happiness, not knowing the cruel fate that awaited her.
I wanted to be in the Army so I could see the world. As nurses, we're assigned in Hawaii and the Philippines and Puerto Rico. We had hospitals in these areas, but none in Europe until after World War II began.
Still, there was a hint of hostilities to come aboard her 29-day voyage across the Pacific from San Francisco to Luzon.
We were told to wear bright dresses so the Japanese wouldn't know our ship carried troops.
Arriving in Luzon, Brantley found the lush mountains, beautiful coastline, and heavenly beaches to be a paradise. Her assignment seemed easy, even laid back. She worked a split schedule from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and again from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. each day in the small station hospital. In between, she enjoyed plenty of leisure, playing golf, swimming, mingling at the officers' club, and shopping in downtown Manila, known as the Pearl of the Orient back then. Although most dependents had been sent back to the U.S. by Thanksgiving, Luzon's tranquility made war seem like an impossibility to Brantley.
Shock is hardly the word when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and we and the Philippines were tossed into war just as suddenly.
Because they were across the international dateline, news of Pearl Harbor's devastation did not reach Fort McKinley Station until Monday morning, when Brantley and the other nurses went to breakfast and heard the first reports over the radio. The head nurse quickly reassured her medical team, telling them there wasn't anything to worry about, that they would not be bothered in Luzon by the Japanese. Later that evening, as shots rang out in the jungle, the nurses decided they did indeed have something to worry about.
We had no idea what to do,
Brantley said in an interview with Soldier magazine in September 1989.
So the 4 of us hid under our bungalow.
By noon the next day, Clark Air Base was under attack, the Japanese destroying most of the bombers whose crews were at lunch.
That was the beginning of the end right there, because they destroyed all the planes and killed and wounded no telling how many people.
The decision was made to move the hospital from Fort McKinley to Manila. Although public buildings were converted into a 300-bed hospital, no patients were received before the medical staff was again ordered to move, this time to the Bataan Peninsula. Brantley and the other nurses had never even heard of the peninsula.
We moved in open buses on the early morning of Christmas Eve, and all along the way we had to stop, get out, and lie in the ditches because of the bombers. No breakfast, no lunch. And when we arrived, nothing was set up.
The medical staff went to work immediately, setting up a hospital in the jungle under the canopy of trees. Brantley was grateful that the monsoon season had not yet arrived. They set up 17 wards with approximately 35 beds in each. Before the tiny field hospital number 1 was fully set up, casualties began arriving by the hundreds, filling and overflowing the hospital.
We had a big Red Cross, but it didn't prevent them from bombing our area. I remember how they killed one woman who was nursing a baby.
The easy nights at Fort McKinley were gone for good as the nurses began working from sunup to sundown, treating the never-ending flow of casualties. Although there was no shortage of casualties, there was a shortage of medicine and food. The nurses knew that the stranglehold the Japanese had on the Americans in the peninsula meant that no further supplies would be forthcoming when the little they had ran out.
We had some horses and mules, and when bombs killed them, we'd give them to the mess as food.
The wounded took it in stride as best as they could.
Our patients were fantastic. They worried about us, our safety.
Brantley recalled one badly injured soldier who seemed more concerned about her than he did his own life-threatening injuries.
I remember a sweet boy from the Midwest who lost all 4 limbs. I stopped by as often as I could. Once after a quiet talk, he said, "What's a nice girl like you doing in a situation like this? You shouldn't be undergoing these hardships." Can you imagine? He said that to me.
One day, Brantley was sent out in the jungle to set up another field hospital for 300 more patients. While she was gone, a 500-pound bomb landed on the hospital, right on her ward. When she returned and saw the devastation, Brantley was heartbroken.
I had no idea how many people were killed, how many patients. It was just getting hopeless.
The Americans could delay the Japanese advance, but they couldn't stop it, and were pushed further and further south until on April 8th, orders came from the hospital commander to move the nurses and as many soldiers as possible as they could to the tunnels of Corregidor Island, aptly called the Rock, at the mouth of Manila Bay.
He said, "Girls, take what you can carry and get on this bus. You're going to the Rock." We said we couldn't leave our patients. Who's going to take care of them? And he said, "You're going to Corregidor." By the time we got out on the road, everything was being sent north to fight the enemy.
The journey across the bay from Luzon to tiny Corregidor was made overland, then by boat. As hopeless as it was, thousands of GIs stayed at Bataan to complete the Army's mission.
The soldiers called themselves the Battered Bastards of Bataan. No Pappy, no Mammy, no Uncle Sam.
The following day, on April 9th, General E.P. King, in command of American and Filipino forces on the island of Luzon, issued an unconditional surrender of the 76,000 troops, 12,000 of them Americans, remaining on Bataan. The next day, the prisoners were herded together, and the 200-mile march from Bataan to Camp O'Donnell in central Luzon began. Starvation, exposure, exhaustion, and dysentery would claim thousands of American POWs, many of whom were butchered by the Japanese when they finally collapsed of exhaustion. Before it was over, some 900 Americans would lose their lives in what became known as the Bataan Death March. Almost simultaneously, the Japanese turned their sights to the tiny garrison at Corregidor, aiming their artillery and sending their bombers to attack it from the air. Despite generators to run the lights and blowers to circulate the air, the tunnels were far from comfortable. Holed up in the tunnels at Corregidor, the situation became increasingly dire for Brantley and the thousands of others taking refuge there. In 1989, Brantley recalled the desperate conditions in Soldier magazine.
It was hot and smelly, and we had more than 1,000 patients. With so many people living so close together, nothing was adequate. Somebody would sleep in a bunk, get up, and go to work, and somebody else would crawl onto the bunk and sleep. And the food was worse than, well, by the time somebody found a supply of cracked wheat that had been stored in the tunnels in 25-pound bags since 1918. I'm not saying it was edible, but we ate it. We ate the worm larvae that floated on the top of the cereal because it was protein. The people who did not survive would not eat what we had.
On May 5th, after an intensive air and artillery bombardment, Japanese soldiers landed on Corregidor and forced the surrender of General Wainwright unconditionally the following day to General Masahiro Homa.
Ammunition, drugs, supplies, food. Almost nothing was left. The only thing we had plenty of was casualties.
Brantley found that nothing changed at first with the surrender.
A Japanese doctor came to accept the surrender at the hospital. He spoke perfect English and said, "Just carry on." So at that point, with the exception of guards everywhere, our situation was exactly the same.
The Japanese had captured the Malinta Tunnel, but did not move the Americans there for another 6 weeks. By the time they finally were moved by ship from the tunnels of Corregidor to Manila's Santo Tomas University, which had been converted into an internment camp, Brantley was so sick from a 105-degree fever, a result of the tropical infectious disease dengue fever, that she was unable to recall much of what had happened. Once at the internment camp, the nurses, numbering 53 in all, were marched to a Catholic girls' school dormitory, where they were able to take showers and were given the first fresh food Brantley had eaten in more than 6 months, fresh pineapples. The nurses were kept separate from the rest of the prisoners for nearly their first 2 months in the camp, despite their protests to the guards.
We told them we're military and want to get out of here, to be with our GIs, to take care of them. But when you got a guy with a bayonet there in front of you, you basically do what he says.
Finally, after almost 2 months, the nurses were allowed to move in with the other 4,000 prisoners and to provide medical assistance where needed. For nearly 3 years, the internment camp would become home to Brantley and several thousand Allied civilians who had been living in Manila prior to the war's outbreak. During their 32 months of captivity, Brantley said that mail was never received and Red Cross packages were allowed in the camp only on 3 occasions. Once, a package of vitamin B complex arrived and did help save lives, according to Brantley. Even in the midst of their captivity and desperate conditions, Brantley recalled in her letter that the nurses never stopped caring for their fellow prisoners of war.
We nurses provided the nursing care for the civilian group. This without enough medicine or other amenities of patient care. The diet was always inadequate. Cornmeal mush, coconut milk watered down, and dirty rice and soup, gravy without protein. Tropical diseases were common, and we treated surgical requirements as professionally as possible with the available doctors. The medical staff consisted of older physicians who had been living in Manila, working for various companies, and a few missionary doctors from China.
Everyone at the camp knew hunger, and the internees existed on the meager rice rations and on the tiny gardens they were allowed to tend. Brantley recalled the struggle to survive.
Outside vendors were allowed in camp with fruits and local vegetables, but most people did not have money to purchase. How we existed and survived the almost 3 years is due to the grace of God and the ingenuity of those in charge, begging, borrowing, cajoling to get food for the internees.
The POWs relied upon 3 male prisoners who had hidden parts of a radio around the camp. When it was safe to do so, they would quickly assemble it, listen to a few broadcasts, then disassemble it and put it back into hiding. They would pass the news on to their fellow prisoners. As hard as it might seem to believe from their prison camp, the POWs had reason to believe the tide of war was turning. In December 1944, aerial leaflets were dropped over the camp.
They told us to hang on, help is on the way. The camp commandant said we were to turn in the leaflets. It was the death penalty if we didn't. I hid one in a can of foot powder.
Hanging on was easier said than done. Abiko, a Japanese lieutenant, treated the POWs, including the nurses, brutally. He had an unpredictable temper and could turn into a rage over the slightest provocation.
If you saw him, you just wanted to dig a hole and crawl into it.
On February 3, 1945, the 1st Cavalry Division of Sherman tanks made a mad 114-mile dash in just 60 hours from the Lingayen Gulf to the outskirts of Manila to rescue the 4,000 internees at Santo Tomas. On night duty, Brantley heard the rumbling of tanks coming towards the main gate of the camp. She and the other nurses hid because they assumed they were Japanese tanks. Abiko didn't hide. He came running out of the main building with his sword and pistol, ready to take on the intruders.
They let him have it right between the eyes. I hate to say it, we were jubilant.
In the firefight that followed, several internees were killed before the Japanese garrison was overwhelmed.
One of the tank crew members yelled, "We're Americans! Isn't anybody here?" And one of the prisoners, "We were all hiding, remember," yelled back, "Yeah! Where have you been? What took you so long?"
After nearly 3 years of captivity, Brantley and the rest of the medical staff were free at last.
God had his hand on the group, and all nurses survived, a total of 67 Army nurses and 12 Navy nurses. We were the first group to be evacuated. We're flown out in a C-47, taking off from a city street, and island hopped home. They gave us time to recover a bit, adjust to the idea of freedom, and by the time we got to San Francisco a few weeks later, we looked almost human.
Despite her ordeal as a prisoner of war, Hattie Brantley decided to remain on active duty with the Army. Upon returning home in 1945, Brantley found that her past was often ignored.
We were told to forget it and don't talk about it. This, at reorientation and repatriation, perhaps it was best that way, as most of us did not care to talk about our experiences.
In 1969, after having served for 30 years in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps in the Philippines, Germany, Italy, and all over the U.S., Brantley retired from Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, where her career had begun all those years ago. When she retired, Brantley was the last Army prisoner of war nurse still in uniform. A few years later, in 1971, Brantley attended a reunion of the American Defenders of Bataan and Corregidor.
This organization had not been activated until about 1965 or so. It was heartwarming to see the reaction of the men and the few nurses attending, to be able to talk it out. Since that time, it has been easier and done frequently.
In her retirement, Brantley became active in the group as well as the Texas Federation of Women's Clubs. She also became an avid beekeeper. Lieutenant Colonel Hattie Brantley would proudly return to Fort Sam Houston again in 1988, this time to accept a POW medal along with 30 other former prisoners of war. Their service and their sacrifices were not forgotten after all. For Brantley, her years of imprisonment were all part of the service she gave willingly to a country she loved.
I consider I had a great career, rare opportunities for service to my country and mankind, and I am thankful for every single bit of it.
Hattie Brantley died at the age of 90 on September 24, 2006. At her request, the Bledsoe Brantley Endowed Nursing Scholarship was created at Baylor University to further the vocation of nursing. She had long mentored other young women in becoming nurses. Brantley had a great sense of humor and made sure she had the last laugh with the epitaph she had inscribed on her tombstone at the New Prospect Cemetery in Jefferson, Texas.
I joined the Army to see the world and ride a horse. In a Japanese prison camp, I ate the horse.
Our song today, I Don't Want to Walk Without You, was written with music by Jules Stein and lyrics by Frank Lossner, and is performed by Helen Forrest and the Harry James Orchestra. The song became a #1 pop hit for Harry James. in 1942. If you liked this podcast of Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes, please leave us a review on whatever podcast network you use. Follow our podcasts and tell your friends. New episodes come out bi-weekly. You can find the companion book on Amazon.com. Until next time, thank you for remembering our World War II veterans.